HLH lingering around in every aspect of practice. So many new, and now not to forget this COVIDs and MISCs and so many things. And every year, literally, one more new disease has come up here and settled down for rest of our lives. There are few diseases totally vanished. The Indian childhood cirrhosis we used to discuss so much and I had exam cases I have not seen over last 25 years. So diseases which are totally vanished. Few diseases have changed their pattern. I recall there used to be the days when enteric used to go into shock, goes to perforation. I have not seen any enteric going into any complication over last 10 or 15 years, though we keep discussing. So the disease has perhaps become very milder. There are we never used to talk about so many MDR bugs, amoxicillin or plain penicillin used to be the drug of choice. But today, every corner, even the community acquired MDR bugs are there. TB is no exception, has really become a big challenge for the changing pattern of the disease. What changed additionally, what changed drastically in our practices are diagnostic labs. The microbiology, which used to be just under microscope, and maybe the culture media, which yield used to be very less, has changed drastically. The culture yield has increased. Newer detection methods like MALDI-TOF in recent time has really made the life much comfortable. Immunology, the understanding as well as the advances in diagnosis, the molecular biology, the PCR, the viruses, we have started recognizing hundreds of viruses with few amount of false positivity as well as negativity, but definitely we know that this particular respiratory disease virus and we don't have to step up the antibiotics or something. So that's a big addition. Radiology, advances in MRI, advances in intervention has really made something which looked impossible 30 years ago has made possible. Other day I was reading Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, the founder of Tesla, and this man only dreamt and or thought of whether this can be brought on the earth. And everything he dreamt, he brought it on the earth. This is something like what we dreamt 30 years ago, and we are seeing it in the same lifetime. We are seeing most of the things coming in reality. The multi-super speciality today, it's very difficult for an individual practitioner to keep updated with what is happening in every patient. And then I sometimes tell the patient, now iske aage kuch nahi ho sakta. I just empirically take an opinion of some super specialists. अरे बस इसके लिए आराम से कर सकते हैं, and it recovers. So I'm not complacent at all. When I feel something cannot be done, I make it a point that I take 2-3 opinions, either senior or a super specialist. And quite often I do get an answer to that. May not be a total solution, but definitely few steps ahead of it. Telemedicine medicine, which was again not established at all. And today half the world is running on telemedicine, and I would say more than half is running. So those are the things. So this is where we started 30 years ago, when we used to have those scalp pen sets in the pyogenic meningitis. And I really wonder how those 3 and 4 weeks of IV antibiotics we managed on scalp pens. This was a pneumoencephalogram, the only modality to diagnose hydrocephalus 30-35 years ago. This was a tent, oxygen tent, the savior in those days. This is a baby bird ventilator on which I recall we had ventilated a bulbar polio 54 days and child survived. And of course, these were the exceptional real survivals on ventilator. We could just initial touch of ventilator. And this was what 37 and 38A and 38B ward telephone. And where we are today on the same lines. These are the advanced lead central lines and PICC lines and peripheral lines with triple lumen with the advanced bandages and less chance of infection. Our tents have gone. I have not used oxygen tent in last 10 years in my hospital. And whenever some baby requires oxygen, that essentially tells you that there is some underlying pathology which requires opening pressures in the lung. And we are on the NIV ventilation devices, maybe in the form of BiPAP or CPAP, maybe invasive ventilation, or sometimes even a high flow nasal cannula that we use. The radiation modality is the biggest advantage. The MRI can tell you the hydrocephalus, can tell you how much pressure it is carrying, whether it is pushing, whether there are any basal exudates, where what is the other, is there any kind of functional pathologies with the MRS and all. So huge advantage. A ventilation, which used to be a kind of a early premonitory ventilator, those kind of are totally changed. And we are seeing the ICU, which is kind of a most high-tech advanced space center today with a ventilator, multicentric monitors, and our old-time telephones are converted into such a big logistics center, such a big information center on a fingertip. In fact, of this cell phone, the biggest function is much more and much more ahead than just calling, taking the calls and giving calls. So whole world change, and perhaps our generation is most privileged to see such a huge change in the technology and such a big impact of this technology on our life and our management. But at the same time, I wonder what has definitely not changed in the last 30 years is something which is clinical medicine. Somebody may call us as an old timer who still believes in clinical medicine because I go to an institution to take up a call and the resident comes and tells me, sir, this child has come up with 3 days history of fever and then cough and now breathlessness and its CBC is this and this. And I wonder what he wants to tell me, the report or the patient. And then I stop him there and tell him, tell me how was the fever? Tell me so this is typical Dr. Ambedkar style, which has brought most of the times to our diagnosis just from the history, and we don't need those ABG. Many times we tell us this ABG is false positive or negative, just on the history. So that's the thing. So importance of detailed history has not changed. Importance of clinical examination has not changed. The importance of growth chart gives us such a huge information and understanding the milestones. Logistic interpretation of all above points is still holds true and is still the most important aspect of our clinical medicine. And I don't think this is going to change in the next 100 years also. What has not changed is the epitome of rationality. Dr. Ambedkar, sir, I've been using this word for last 10 minutes and I'll be using this word for rest of my life. But because I still believe whatever I am today is simply because of this man. Sir is there. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us and being in our lives. I think you have enlightened so many lives of pediatricians. And with that, you have really helped thousands and lakhs of children of this country to get a proper rational therapy. So what has not changed is the epitome of rationality, the epitome of clinical approach, the logical thinking, the ethical practice, and not the least the teaching skills and passion. So I humbly dedicate today's my talk to you because whatever cases I'm going to show, every case has some impact of your teaching on my life. I'm really privileged and happy to be associated with you for last 30 years. Simple word. I recall this in one of the Science PG clinics, sir saying, and this is not very far away, just about 7 or 8 years ago. And sir said, just by seeing the child who is hypoproteinemic to know what is likely cause of hypoproteinemia. So in case of a nephrotic who is otherwise playful, active, the only problem is he's getting adequate proteins through GI, breaking those proteins into multiple amino acids in the GI. He's reassembling those amino acids into body required proteins through liver, and those proteins are going all over. Now, one of these proteins, that is only albumin, is leaked in the kidneys, which gives decreased osmotic pressure and the edema. As you can, nephrotic, his rest function is back normal. This is a well, healthy, grown child who is just edematous, playful, happy, edematous child. Is a nephrotic unless proved otherwise. Look at the other hypoproteinemic child. Here is a child who is not getting proteins to eat at all. So all amino acids are deficient. Liver cannot make albumin and it cannot make any other protein. So actually it is a hypoamino acidemia. All amino acids are deficient because he's kwashiorkor, not getting any proteins, and then all proteins in the body are deficient. So he's having the hair changes, he's having the skin changes, which depend so much on the proteins, and also he's having irritability due to enzyme deficiency, hormone deficiency, all proteins are deficient. And there comes the third category of hypoalbuminic edema, in which the person can eat protein, can make the amino acids, but those amino acids are neither getting reassembled into body required proteins, but at the same time, because of the liver being failed, body cannot tackle the toxins. So here there is a deficiency of multiple body required proteins plus the toxemia in the form of the angiomas and encephalopathy. You've got edema and this kind of the clubbing of the fingers and angiomas, toxicity of liver with hypoproteinemia, liver cell failure. So just observing the patient, you know why is edematous, and if he's hypoalbuminic, the cause of albumin. So this is just an observation. You have three different categories. That's where the clinical medicine stands so tall above all the investigations. I'm going to show you the investigation fallacies which are considered as gold standard in today's medicine, which has totally failed to secondary to a clinical examination, which has always superseded. Disease state, sir has already told us, disease state is all about agent, host, and environment interplay. If all factors are usual or normal, that is, if the agent is a conventional agent, host is normal, environment is not different, then one can easily predict the disease based on the history and clinical examination. If any of these factors is abnormal, then there can be fallacies and there can be difficulties wherein some of the investigations may help you. At the same time, when you have unusual presentation, think of uncommon presentation of the common disease. After that, maybe common presentation of the uncommon disease, and very rarely uncommon presentation of uncommon disease. So you have a conventional classical presentation of a disease, and if you have something uncommon, then think of uncommon presentation of a common disease. And I'm going to show you a couple of cases on that as well. So nutshell of it, a good history taken brings you to 60 to 70% times a diagnosis. Maybe 20% addition to that will be a clinical examination, and investigation may add about 10% to the diagnosis. Most of the times we do investigation just to confirm what we have got on the history and examination, and really investigation of the sort has to be always based on what you got on the history and clinical examination. If this is not true, so if you fail on this, then perhaps always think either the agent is abnormal, the host is abnormal, or the environment is abnormal. Or it could be multiple pathologies in the same patient in the index case. Now, let's come to the cases. First, what I'm going to do is tell you the importance of history through few cases, then clinical examination, then maybe labs, then maybe radiology, then maybe I'll giving, if the patient don't respond, what to think, and then I will take some subtle cases. So in all, I have nearly 20 cases, so I have to keep you busy for next 2 hours. So let's go with that. This is the first case. A 3-year-old child was sent by the pediatrician for occasional cough since last 2 days, no other complaints, and child was otherwise absolutely all right. So he came for like a walking patient for cold cough or whatever. For some reason, he took an X-ray. Now this is very common practice that you have some doubts or even sometimes just in a busy OPD, chalo X-ray karke lao. So X-ray was taken and he found some abnormality and he had a radiopaque shadow in the chest. X-ray chest. Now it's fitting in the right main bronchus site. If you see carefully, you can see the trachea, you can see the trachea being marked, and then you can see my cursor, am I right? You can see my cursor.
Yeah.
I will take.
Yeah.
So you can see this radiopaque shadow probably coming in the right main bronchus. So I thought, let me confirm it. So I took a lateral X-ray. Now it is clearly seen this is trachea and a bronchus at the carina, you are seeing it. So obviously I summoned the pediatric surgeon to do the bronchoscopy, and to our surprise, there was no foreign body in the bronchoscope. Where is the foreign body gone? So we checked the X-ray again, and the foreign body is in the intestine, gone down in the colon. Now why it happened? So lesson learned, in the history there was no significant cough. Foreign body is the airway disease. Cough is absolute benchmark of it. This child never had a significant cough at all. He never had a choking episode. Now, of all the tracheal or airway foreign bodies, chances that you may get a choking episode is only 40%. This is evidence based. But presentation will be definitely severe cough. Some part of the time, this child never had it. So that should have definitely alert you. And this case also told me another learning lesson. Take a fresh X-ray chest always before foreign body removal when you come across these kind of things. Had I taken, because this previous X-ray was taken 4 hours ago to confirm it, and then I summoned the pediatric surgeon, and then child kept NBM and all, took 6 hours. Always take a fresh X-ray just before taking the patient on a table, and you won't be surprised to see that it was a esophageal foreign body which fooled you to be as a tracheal foreign body. So those are the kind of things. Past history does matter when you take the cases. This is a preterm newborn, neonate, 32 weeks, 1.4 kg male baby, was sent for routine neonatal care. Mother had preeclampsia on treatment and a polyhydramnios. His feeds were started on day 1. On day 4, baby had abdominal distension, was tachycardic, poor pulses, liver was 1 centimeter, but the baby was alert otherwise. Septic screen was sent, which came up negative. Baby received 1 bolus of fluids, and we started dopamine since he was looking poor pulses. Functional echo at this point of time revealed there was hypovolemia. There was Nowadays we do all these modalities very often. We have got bedside echoes and bronchoscopes, and That is what is a major change in the life. So we did a functional echo which showed hypovolemia. Now, we did a septic screen which was normal, blood culture was negative, and this was the electrolyte. Sodium was 102, normal is 140, 102, drastic hyponatremia. Potassium was low, 3, and chloride was 90. And then we rechecked it because you may have lab fallacies, but it was confirmed. What is the thought process at this point of time? So pan-hypoelectrolytemia in a newborn. The monitoring checked and intensified at this point of time. We gave 3% normals. Mind you, this child was getting dehydrated, was what? Still alert, which was not fitting in case of hyponatremia, which is 109. I expected this child to be lethargic with that sodium, but the child was not that lethargic. 3% hypertonic saline was given, followed by infusion. We wanted to get the sodium up gradually. Again, we rechecked it after 48 hours with this kind of a sodium supplement, still 104, not coming up. What is it? Why he is asymptomatic? That sodium level was the most important question. And again, as our teacher told us, probably this is there for quite a long time, to which the body is adjusted to, so he's not getting drowsy. So any change in the numbers in the body will clinically manifest for two reasons. Either it is too low, and second, it has happened in a very short duration of time where the body did not get time to adjust to that. So I have a normal sodium 140. If this drops to 130 within hours, within 6 hours, 12 hours, child will become lethargic, may convulse. But that 140 goes to 120 over 3 or 4 days, child will not convulse. Typically in case of SIDH, happens all the time, and the child may not become lethargic for quite a long time. So that is what probably is happening. That told us that this sodium must have been low for quite a long time. Now, why so low? Urine output we checked. Urine was 10 ml per kg. So now he's polyuric, and with that sodium, his urine was 65 milliequivalents per liter. Now body has a fantastic autoregulatory mechanism. As the plasma sodium drops, the kidneys will stop excreting sodium totally. So normally at a sodium of 140, your urine sodium are never more than 40 milliequivalents per liter. Now here at 104, I expected urine sodium to be 0. He's 64. So obviously he's pathologically losing sodium through the urine. So he's polyuric and losing sodium. So why is losing that? We checked the history again, went to the history again, and then revealed he was a pre-eclamptic child. Mother, he was polyuric. So he was having polyhydramnios, as I mentioned in the first slide. Why he was polyhydramnios? Because mother was receiving furosemide for almost 4 weeks prior to delivery. So that furosemide continued to act even after delivery, and the whole story took almost another 2 weeks for the urine output to stop. And then with the replacement of sodium and water and fluids over next 1-2 weeks, gradually the urine output dropped and sodium increased to 124. So take home, unexplained neonatal problems. Eagerly look for antenatal insults and interventions. They have a lot to play as far as baby is concerned. You can't take baby as an isolated unit. It's a combined unit with mother. Whatever has been given to the mother antenatally will have some impact for weeks, for months, and sometimes for years, the rest of his life. That has to be taken into consideration. Now, third case. Incomplete history can mislead you. Here is an 8-year-old 15 kg girl. Came with leg pain since 4 days. Progressive ascending weakness in 48 hours. Not moving in bed and difficulty breathing since 6 hours. No fever, preceding infection. I'm sure most of you must have already said this is classical GBS. And even we were thinking the same way. Apparently, all right before this disease. So he was a driver, ambulance driver who had brought this child. And he said, नहीं मेरा बाकी का 3 बच्चा है, जैसे ये भी है, ऐसा कुछ सिग्निफिकेंट नहीं, सिर्फ 2 साल पहले इसको कुछ पेट दुखता था, तभी हमने उसका कुछ जांच किया था. And I went through all the papers, and that judge, as usual, somebody had done a sonography at which said there was a nephrocalcinosis, and then next 2 years there was nothing in this child. On examination, this child was bang normal, saturations are borderline at this point of time, but GCS was 15/15. It was slightly tachypnic. 8 years, 48 is definitely significant tachypnea, but looking slightly acidotic breathing more than that. CNS Cranial nerves were normal, hypotonic or reflexive power 1 by 4 or 1 by 5, all the limbs, paradoxical breathing, anxious looking child. So there was a diaphragmatic palsy also in view of paradoxical breathing. Obviously, diagnosis, GBS as we thought of, we admitted, we stabilized the child, we had to intubate this child, and then we sent the reports. And obviously, as part of ICU spectrum, we sent his electrolytes, sodium 122, potassium 105, chloride 9. Normal potassium is 3.5 to 5.5. This is severe hypokalemia. So you have your diagnosis probably, and with that, there was significant metabolic acidosis, and this was normal anion gap metabolic acidosis. Normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, panhypoelectrolytemia, your diagnosis is already written on the background of nephrocalcinosis. It's a distal renal tubular acidosis, and the paralysis was simply because of severe hypokalemia. Potassium correction with initial rapid and later slow correction. Child started walking on the next day. Mind you, recognition of these pathologies. This child was referred to us by another pediatrician who had ventilation facility as a kind of a temporary phenomenon. This child could have been done well there itself, but this was referred because being a GBSA may require prolonged ventilation. Look at the clinical spectrum and recognizing and getting the history completely right. This child had history of polyuria all throughout. Went through the history, this child used to get up at night to drink water, used to drink a lot of water as compared to his other sibs, and he was severely malnourished. So this was distal RTA manifesting as GBS because of severe hypokalemia. Hint was nephrocalcinosis on previous reports, polyuria, severe PM, getting up at night. So get into detail history, whether it is relevant to the case. At times, it may be just a mechanical effort, but one has to do it. One has to go through that in details. So take home, don't just jump onto conclusion. Past history, past report do make sense. Sometimes the patient comes with a big file to you. You are busy in the OPD, has brought 3-4 files. You just put them apart, make your new file, and then go through that. And you make some diagnosis, and then cursory your PG tells, sir, ये report में कुछ तो abnormal दिख रहा है, देख लो. And something is totally enlightening comes out of it. So don't do that. If you have multiple files, better keep those files with you. Go through that at your leisure hours. Call the patient next day, and you may get something different out of it. Next case. This was thanks to Dr. Sawar Agarwal. The synonym onset duration progress, he said it's like a OTP of any bank transaction. So ODP is as important as OTP, the one-time password that we get. So onset duration progress is so important in your clinical practice and history. So to say that this is a case, this is a 4-year-old village girl was sent for respiratory difficult to us, suspecting it is either respiratory infection or foreign body aspiration. The history was hinting otherwise. Very interesting history. This girl, she came from some distinct native. She came from Konkan actually, from Dapoli area. And she was brought with difficulty in breathing to the primary pediatrician. So she went to bed somewhere at 10 o'clock. Around I think the early in village they go to bed at 9 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock. Went to bed. Suddenly at 12 night, the father found her to be breathless. He picked her up and took the local pediatrician. Local pediatrician thought it's a respiratory infection, but there was no preceding fever, cold, cough as we got from the subsequent history. He thought it's a respiratory infection. He gave nebulization, oxygen, but the distress went on increasing overnight. And in the morning, he had few apneic episodes. So he took his RMO, a lady, a very brave lady RMO, and he took in the ambulance. They started from Dapoli early morning, somewhere like 6 o'clock. They reached my place after 6 hours. And at the last half an hour, 1 hour, this poor lady was umbuing the child because child stopped breathing in the ambulance. When he was brought to us, he was bradycardic, he was limp, hypotonic, unconscious, no spontaneous breathing. We quickly intubated the child, and to our surprise, within next 10 minutes, all vital parameters were back to normal. Now, what was it? He never had any primary respiratory pathology, never had any choking, suddenly became breathless, goes back to the but recovers also very fast. And this was his X-ray. This was his X-ray when he came to us. On this X-ray, the pathologist, the primary pediatrician has referred this child to us as a foreign body. He thought it's a foreign body on this side. But the history was never like a foreign body. He never cuffed, he never choked, he never had any preceding history. And this was typical history of a crate bite in a village area. When a bang normal child in the sleep suddenly comes with respiratory pathology difficulty, but if you don't tackle it well, he will die of respiratory paralysis. He turned out to be a crate bite. He never had a cough, he never had a cold, he never had fever, no choking, nothing. Sudden tachypnea, progressive distress, and then apnea and paralysis. And he had quadriplegic things. Within next 72 hours, we could extubate the child and he went home on 7th day. History, the onset, duration, progress. There is no test to prove or disprove snake bite. But he recovered so well with anti-snake venom. Within 24 hours, started moving well. 3rd day, we could extubate. Child went home without any deficit. Thanks to that, I moved the baby for almost half an hour in a moving ambulance. And he could get the child alive to us. That's the strength of a good history. So ODP is extremely important in clinical medicine. It's all about proper history, the onset, duration, and progress. In your clinical practice, the age of onset of the disease is extremely important. Here was a 2 months male, non-consanguineous. He was brought with fever for 2 days, cough, cold, and loose stools. He was born with 3.4 kg. At 2 months, he was 4 kg, so definitely not gaining weight well. He had a previous sibling died due to pneumonia at 6 months of age. This baby was malnourished. He's not gaining weight, as I said, but rest everything was okay except mild pallor. As a part of his initial evaluation, we sent his CBC, and this was his CBC. His hemoglobin was 8 gram, WBC 6,000, poly is 90, lymphos 10, platelets. This was his further. So what comes to your mind? Child coming with a preceding history, consanguineous marriage, previous sibling loss, 2 months, not gaining weight, coming with this. And what does this count tell you? So on the background of the previous history, again, this count tells you a lot. He has got absolute lymphopenia. The lymph node, lymphocyte is 10% of 6,000, that is 600. Any lymphocyte count less than 2,500 in a first year of child, than 1 year, think of SCID. You will never face severe combined immunodeficiency. This child was confirmed, and probably previous child also must have had the same thing. So subsequently looked at the tonsils which were absent, and that's how, and then every theory. So again, every child coming within first 1 year of life, think of congenital problems. If it is respiratory recurrent pathology, think of congenital respiratory anomalies. It could be tube fistula, it could be H-type fistula, it could be bronchogenic cyst, it could be maybe ciliary dyskinesia, immunodeficiency, so many things. Cardiac, it could be congenital hearts, not to forget a big chunk of IM disorders which will come within first 1 year, and immunodeficiencies we are recognizing more and more so within first 6 months T cell, and after that T as well as B cell both can come. So any disease pathology coming recurrent, frequent, non-responding, odd organism, odd site, think of immunodeficiency, and coming within 1 year, think of congenital anomalies. Analyzing complex. Now here I'm putting more light. This is more of our Science PG clinic, which has enlightened us and made us richer in our understanding. In fact, that particular clinic perhaps teaches the consultants more than the students. I personally had a huge advantage of in my understanding. I believe if I split my whole understanding as 8 years of my undergraduate postgraduate understanding, 20 years of my pre-science clinic and 10 years of post-science clinic, I've learned 70-80% of my medicine in this last 10 years than my first. And it's all again thanks to my teachers and the whole Science PG clinic group. So sequence of events, how that really matters. So I told you about the symptoms, and I'm going to tell you the sequence of events. So here is a 6-year child who was brought with cough since 7 days, low fever since 2 days, and dyspnea since 1 day. In fact, we had presented a similar kind of case in last PG clinic, science clinic, which turned out to be a thoracic mass. So here, cough started first. It's an airway disease, low grade fever, some inflammation, which of last 2 days could be infective, non-infective, and now dyspnea coming within no time. So either some complication is coming up or it is progression of the primary disease. Now, what comes to your mind on this background? This can be asthma, but less likely dyspnea coming so late. This could be a mass or anything. Now, I'll tell you how we analyze these same three symptoms when they come in a different sequence. So how do you analyze various sequences? Suppose fever comes first, then after a few days cough, and then dyspnea. This is a typical respiratory bacterial infection, a pneumonia getting to empyema probably by the end of first week. The second possibility, cough to start with low fever and dyspnea as we saw in this present case. It could be asthma, it could be any airway compression which become complicated later on. Third one, if it is sudden cough, then fever after a few days and then dyspnea, this could be foreign body. If it is cough followed by dyspnea or orthopnea, then edema could be congestive cardiac failure, where edema may be optional, but when it comes to progressive effort intolerance and orthopnea, congestive cardiac failure. If it is fever, after many days comes with cough followed by dyspnea, it could be slow subacute onset pathology like Cox, which may come with a fever and then later on the airway getting involved with maybe a lymph node compressing or somebody coming with endobronchial tuberculosis. So same three symptoms. At what sequence, at what severity, at what duration they appear, the interpretation changes. That's the beauty of a clinical medicine. And we need to understand and we need to make ourselves habituated to getting into this background. I'll tell you yesterday's case in which is admitted in my PICU. This child had fever about 5 days ago. Now, this is not put up in this case, but now in the course of events, I want to tell you the importance of the history. This child last week for 3 days had fever and then investigated with CBC, not revealed anything. Hemoglobin was normal, platelets were low, 1 lakh, counts were on 4,000. After 3 days, the fever went off, RT-PCR was done normal. This is a 17-year-old child. Then for 3 years, child was absolutely all right. Though slightly, I would say, mother, as Joel used to say, some dullness. Fourth day on the 7th day of the course, child said, I am having some headache or something. That is day prior to yesterday, day before yesterday. He went to bed at 8 o'clock. He slept for 14 hours at a stretch, did not get in between. Got up in the 10 o'clock in the morning and for his scheduled blood test, he drove the car to the lab. 17-year-old boy went with his uncle, drove the car, gave his blood, came back, had food. 10 o'clock he went there. At 12 o'clock he had, again he slept. At 3 o'clock, father went to wake him up. He got up but started making some shivering movements and then followed by some involuntary movement, which then was called up his pediatrician, rushed to the pediatrician within next 20 minutes, behaved like a seizure and then was admitted, given lorazepam and all, and then was sent to us, whether this is malaria, cerebral malaria or what, or something differential about seizure activity. Going into details of the history, one thing I took almost half an hour's history. What was noticeable, the episode of those moments, all throughout the child was responsive. He was answering either in the mumming way or in the kind of a nodding way to the mother. Doka dukte ka? Zara tond ughadun दाखव बघू. Slight moment. So he was conscious during all those 20 minutes and he has been involved. So looking like a dystonic posturing and getting in the history, there is some doubt history of some medicine consumption. So this was not a seizure. That's the importance of breaking up the history and getting into details and sequence of event. Probably it's turning out to be an extrapyramidal reaction following some medication. So that's the beauty of the whole ODP. Now coming back to this case, which came as cough 7 days, low fever 2 days, dyspnea since 1 day. Now, this is the X-ray which we took it. As I said, this must have started with the airway and then progressed on to dyspnea. So whether it is either alveolar, pleural or something, we need to find out. Now see the X-ray, read the X-ray, very interesting. Here is the trachea, which is definitely showing a shift. You are seeing a opacity on this side. One may say this is pleural effusion which has shifted the mediastinum. Had it been a pleural effusion shifting the mediastinum, you won't have seen this hyperlucent or lucent area. So this is not a complete pleural effusion. The underlying link is visible. So the pleural effusion is not very large. It is in pneumonic effusion. Now, then what is shifting this? Probably a mass sitting here. That is what explains there is a mass which started with the airway and this could be secondary complication which is transiently compressing. See the beauty of correlating the history with the labs and X-ray. Okay, do you agree with me? This is a hyperlucent. This is the kind of a normal lung shadow we are seeing. So my costophrenic angle is full, so pleural fluid is there. It's not big enough to hide this. Had it been a massive pleural effusion, it would have collapsed this and you won't have seen this at all. It's a little bit of pleural effusion, and airway pathology and shift of mediastinum is probably because of some probable mass shifting here, and that is what it turned out to be. We did a tap which was hemorrhagic tap. This was a case from Vadia I saw last year. So in view of severe respiratory distress, another important thing, he came in severe distress, intubated, and as soon as intubation, the distress went off totally. That re-emphasized that there was an airway obstruction due to some mass, and the tube has bypassed that obstruction. Respiratory distress immediately stopped immediately. We took put an ICD in the child which was bloody. This turned out to be a lymphoma arising from the thymic origin, thymic mass, turned out to be a malignancy. And this of history correlating with the chest X-ray. And this is how our forefathers 30, 20 years ago, they didn't have this scanning imaging modalities, must have learned clinical medicine. That's how they have been trying to teach us and carry such a huge value. Perhaps we have huge privilege of experiencing the wisdom of our forefathers and correlate with the present technology. When you mix up and correlate and make the best amalgamation, the past wisdom and the present advantage, perhaps we make the best patients out of it. The clinical examination skill we need to mature till the end of our life. It goes on and on and on. I don't think one can ever say that I'm the best at it, because every now and then you see a new case which fools you. It's an interesting case. Here is a child, a 4-year-old boy. This one I saw just a month ago. He was referred for fever for 5 days, cough and cold on day 1. Now is increased. My difficulty in breathing since last 2 days. My resident saw this child and he said, "Sir, मेरे को जरा doubtful stridor जैसा लगता है." He was tachypneic, saturation was borderline, low grade fever was there, and the fever was high grade in this child. And he said it's doubtful stridor. Then came the consultant, and even I confirmed it was actually a biphasic stridor. Now, is there a difference between stridor, a plain stridor, and a biphasic stridor? There's a huge difference in understanding. When I talk about stridor, I'm essentially talking about a supraglottic obstructive pathology. That may be a epiglottis, that may be a supraglottic mass, that may be a laryngeal pathology. And when I talk about a biphasic stridor, I'm essentially talking about a mediastinal pathology. Now, both of them are amenable to either scanning or scopy. But if you could make out what exactly you want, perhaps the life becomes more simple. Now, we had probable pathology sitting in the mediastinum, and which is, or in the trachea, it could be tracheal lumen, it could be tracheal wall or something compressing from outside. So obviously the next thing comes to us, I wanted to take a chest X-ray, which was not really giving any more clues. You could see the airway, which is looking quite okay all throughout. So nothing through that. Then, there a small pneumonia patch was there, but was not. I did his CT scan first. I said, see, without invasoscopy, if I can get something. This is what it showed. This was his scan. There is nothing really. Scan was clear. CT scan person reported as nothing, though here I could see the trachea, the posterior wall was flat at some point of time, but nothing really much. No mass. I was expecting on the background of his high counts and fever, I thought whether there is any abscess in the mediastinum or something, but really nothing in that. Meanwhile, the radiologist had some doubt. He said, I'll do an MRI also. So he did the MRI, but child could not be sedated. So he sent it back. What next? Obviously, I had to see now, go inside with the scope. So I did the scopy. This is the larynx. You can see the laryngeal opening. I'm negotiating the larynx. You are inside the trachea and see what is there. The trachea, which should be a circular ring, you are clearly seeing a compression on the posterior wall of the trachea. It's looking like a omega shape. And once you negotiate through that, it's almost few centimeter part which is having posterior protrusion, and beyond that, just above the carina, it is again open and you can see the carina, though it's again a narrow part. So that confirms there is a compression on posterior wall of the trachea. So I talked to the radiologist. I said, I'm sure there is something. But he said, sir, CT is not showing anything. Then I spoke to our gastroenterologist, Vibho. See, what should I do? I feel, and he said in the MRI, sir, I feel a circular wall thickening of the esophagus. So now it's not in my preview. So I sent it to Dr. Vibho. He went through the scopy. Now they reviewed. There is a wonderful radiologist, pediatric radiologist in SRCC, Dr. Hiren Panavala. I'm extremely impressed with his clinical knowledge. So he also reviewed it, and then they decided that they should go esophagoscopy because on his scan again he found it's a esophageal circumferential wall thickening, which is unusual. So they took biopsy from that area, and our differential diagnosis was a thickened esophageal wall, probably due to lymphoma. This pathology we had suspected just on the basis of one single clinical finding, that is biphasic stridor. Sometimes we say I am at a very periphery, I don't have this support, this support. Actually, clinical medicine takes care of everything. Biphasic stridor is a pathology which requires a detailed evaluation of the mediastinum, has to be referred. Now, if you keep on treating this as a respiratory distress with a high antibiotic, because there is a bacterial count, you will lose this child. This has to be investigated further. So one single clinical finding biphasic stridor makes whole life different in this case. So sometimes precise findings are more important than labs or imaging. Another case, trivial trauma child. 2-year-old girl is brought with limping gaits in 5 days. He can walk, she can walk, sit, roll over, and feed herself. There was a history of fall while playing just prior to this. So she had a fall from a cot, and after that she started limping, as the father told us. It indicates mild non-restricting pain. On examination, no local pain I could elicit, no restricted passive that I could see, no local swelling, but she could walk with a limp. Some pain on walking while, and he was irritable on board. Now, I could easily this that some blunt trauma, he's walking, and then let him go, give some anti-inflammatory or something. But as the thing goes, lessons from PG clinic and lesson from the grand rounds, we do some cursory clinical examination, and to our surprise, there are no passive joint movement pain, and I could see slight brisk reflexes. Plantar's right was upgoing. Doubtful, but upgoing. I'm surprised. I went into details. Then detailed questioning asked the father, the child has recent onset nasal twang and nasal regurgitation of the liquids. And now the whole battery starts. So this is the lower motor neuron cranial nerves because bulbar pulse is there. Upper motor neuron lower limbs because of going plantar. My lesion is in the medulla. I immediately got an MRI, and this is what I got. There was medullary lesion, a high malignant tumor which was sitting there, which was picked up in reasonably early and then obviously referred. Now you may miss this kind of serious pathologies. So trivial is not trivial in your clinic practice. You cannot miss such kind of trivial things. So when it comes with cursor things, go with some basic clinical examination. However minor presentation, basic examination is must to rule out probable red flags. This is something which you may miss in the clinical findings. Another child is neonate full-term normal delivery. He was shoulder dystocia, cried immediately after birth. Tachypnea, this is a rickshaw delivery, shoulder dystocia. This child was referred to me on day 5 because tachypnea was there on day 5. Child was tachypnic, slightly anxious, definitely respiratory rate was high, 70 per minute, but saturation is well maintained. There are subcostal, intercostal retractions in this baby. And this was his X-ray. You could easily see there is something, probably left diaphragm being pushed up very high, and right side lung, everything is all right. Now, what is there? Very interesting. Here, we suspected something. So one history helped the diagnosis. The history was he had shoulder dystocia, hand prolapse. One clinical examination clinched the diagnosis. We elicited Moro's reflex, which was asymmetric. The left hand was not moving adequately. One X-ray finding confirmed the diagnosis. I showed you the left diaphragm being higher up than the right diaphragm. This was left diaphragm palsy due to Erb's palsy. The C5 in the hand, C5 in the diaphragm. This was hemiparesis in the diaphragm. In fact, this was diagnosed, this was referred for surgery to us because there was the eventuation of diaphragm and then we may have to do a surgery. But it was frank nerve palsy. We did nothing for the child, waited for 2 weeks, gradually the tachypnea distress. So clinical examination is so important. You have to go through the basics. A neonate, when it comes, don't go through the neonate reflexes. You will certainly find something which will help you in reaching the diagnosis. Moving further, a newborn 3 kg male, term normal delivery, respiratory distress noticed at 2 hours of life, so he was referred to us. We admitted to an ICU. He was tachypneic, respiratory distress present, conducted sounds in the chest, distress progressed by 6 hours. He went to respiratory failure, so had to be intubated and ventilated. This was the baby's X-ray at this time. Note the X-ray. There was difficulty in ventilating this baby. The ventilator was alarming as air leak. The expiratory tidal volume is always very low, so there is air leak. There's poor expansion of the chest, so no pressure alarms. So he was having a good, once I taken Abu, he was really doing well, no obstruction, nothing. But chest expansion I could not see. And we noticed abdomen was definitely full, gas in the abdomen. And then we noticed there was clear sounds heard in the abdomen. Then the X-ray, which was showing, see this, gas full of, stomach full of gas. Where is this gas coming? In a ventilated child. Clear suspect whether it is what? We did a bronchoscopy. I am at a carina and you could see this. He had a H-type TO fistula, which was not allowing us to ventilate this baby. We are keeping a tube above the carina and this was exactly at the carina. So gas was leaking through this carina into the stomach, which was making the Fundic shadow prominent, and we had to operate this child within 12 hours. So this was reported as one of the earliest pickup of H-type fistula. Now, thanks again to the logical thinking. The baby who is having distended abdomen, baby who cannot be ventilated effectively, he has a leak, air leak on the ventilator, the gas is leaking into the stomach. Now, it's all analytical thinking in a given case to get right. And then with, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Little early. We are complaining about the voice.
Okay. Is it okay? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold it up there. Okay, fine. So now, okay, is it okay? Is it okay now? Okay. So can I try without micro earphone? Just it is better. Is it better now? Is it better now?
More or less same, I think.
More or less same. So I'll use a micro earphone only.
No.
Okay, I'll go with the earphone. I'll hold it up. Hello, is it audible?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Everybody's fine? Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is okay. Yeah.
Is it okay now also?
No.
But it is less?
Previous one. Yeah.
I will hold it here. Okay, fine. Okay. So now, coming to the next part, labs. I said that I will be taking the correlating labs also with the clinical. I need to look at a complete picture, not just labs. Labs has to be interpreted on the basis of clinical history. A slightly complex one. 3-year-old, severe malnourished child, 7.5 kg child. He was brought with diarrhea.
Vinod, please mute yourself. Vinod.
ब्लूटूथ नहीं हाँ
Can we mute everybody and then I will unmute myself only? Okay.
Dolly?
Go?
Yeah.
I'm audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now this is 3-year-old severe malnutrition child, 7.5 kg, diarrhea since 2 days, watery 3 to 4 times per day, birth, full term normal delivery 2.7 kg at birth, severely malnourished. Now this child was brought with severe dehydration with shock. He was lethargic, mild abdominal distension, poor peristalsis, acidotic breathing. But in front of me, in spite of shock, he passed large quantity urine. He was dehydrated and shocky, and he passed large quantity urine. Now that doesn't fit into it, right? You don't expect this baby who's dehydrated to pass urine, but this passed. What comes to your mind? It's very unusual. Okay, shock child will be defined by all hemodynamic instabilities and oliguria, but this child passed large quantity, whether it was collected in the bladder which he passed or whether he passed freshly. So I asked the mother, he said no, about 2 hours ago he had passed. So definitely this is something collected. So what is unusual in this child? We need to find out. So we gave oxygen with NRM, ABG electrolyte sent, needed 2 boluses and plan C for dehydration. Now this child had a nutritional deficit. I didn't go into details, but he had a nutritional deficit all throughout, a poor class, slum class person. And so he required those dehydration correction. We corrected it over next about 12 hours. And then we checked his ABG, which was looking ABG. This was the initial ABG, which was severely acidotic, metabolic acidosis with pan-hypoelectrolytemia, sodium, potassium, chloride. So something like I described in the previous case of RTA, was looking like RTA. So now after correction, we checked it and the ABG was doing much, much better. His electrolytes also a bit better. Still potassium was low. Looks more active. Shock is corrected, sodium and potassium started. We started the correction on sodium, potassium. Child become dehydrated again in next 24 hours through minimal diarrhea. So now the diarrhea are less, but still he becomes dehydrated. So obviously again, we thought whether we are dealing with RTA. So we're working on that. Nothing we could do at this point. We kept on resuscitating, monitored urine output, which was 6 ml per kg per. What are the possible causes? Here, we started potassium correction. So we started with, initially, as I said, the potassium was very low. We started correcting with 40 milliequivalents per liter. And then we checked potassium after 24 hours, a bit better, 2.9, still not a normal. Otherwise, sodium and chloride were much better. Child still has polyuria, abdominal distension, poor peristalsis. Why it is so? So this is the point of time we checked magnesium. Magnesium is 1.2. All of us know that magnesium is essential for potassium to function and for potassium levels to maintain. So when you have hypokalemia, always look at potassium, magnesium. So here we started supplementing magnesium. Quickly the potassium became normal. Urine output also, once the potassium became normal, magnesium became normal, the urine output reduced. Now this is an interchain. We need to understand. Hypomagnesemia can lead to hypokalemia, and potassium is essential for the antidiuretic hormone to work on the distal convoluted tubule. So ADH become defunct on the background of hypokalemia. So if there is a shocky child, hypovolemic child, and if he is hypokalemic also, whatever amount of fluids you give, that will be lost in the urine. You have to correct that potassium first. When the potassium becomes normal, ADH starts working and fluid will be retained. But here, potassium was low secondary to hypomagnesemia and so on. So we had to correct all three to get it normal. So message, understanding physiology is extremely important to understand the critical interventions. And again, coming back to that, my first MBBS knowledge never goes west. Whether it is anatomy, physiology, or biochemistry, is going to help. I think most of us reach 60, 70, 80%. To excel that, we need to have our basic sciences really very strong. That will help you over the time. And this is one good case to understand. Second case, never overlook the reports. This is a 3-week-old, second-degree consanguineous baby brought with seizures without encephalopathy in between. Now, 3 weeks coming with seizures without encephalopathy, first thing comes to your mind is calcium. You are right. His calcium was 6.4, phosphates were 4.5. So obviously we checked his parathyroid, vitamin D levels, and IV calcium replacement. vitamin activated, vitamin D started, his parathyroid was definitely low for that calcium level. The normal parathyroid level is 50. With this kind of calcium, I expect it to be 100 plus. Here it was low 25, so definitely hypoparathyroidism. Vitamin D was borderline. Seizures still continued in spite of giving activated vitamin D. 125 we started for this child, Roquetrol with calcium, but seizures continued. We checked his magnesium, 1.1. So magnesium is essential to maintain calcium as well as potassium levels in the body. This is very important electrolyte. All of us must never kind of neglect that. We started magnesium IV. Both the levels gradually recovered and his vitamin D was also given and the child was discharged. But कहानी अभी काफी बाकी है. This is not end of the story. Calcium and magnesium levels on follow-up were normal and child was asymptomatic, wherein child came at 2 months with a high grade fever. We checked his urine, which was UTI classical, 50 to 60%, proteins 1 plus, specific gravity 1.005, pH 5.8, culture grew E. coli more than 1 lakh and UHG normal. He was treated with appropriate antibiotics and he became all right. Now, this is how we see all the reports and we are happy that we picked up. His UHG was normal. So we said, let's wait, and he was put on prophylaxis. His hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia for some reason persisted and required 2 more admissions in subsequent 2 months for hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, every time settling down. And he was all throughout on Roquetrol. So we started thinking whether we have some magnesium losing deficiency somewhere and congenital magnesium. So we took a consultation with endocrinologist and we were almost to send his genetic workup as a rare case of magnesia, hypomagnesemia. At 5 months, the child again came with fever. Meanwhile, his UTI was monitored. And this time again, PC, first cells were 15 to 20, protein 3 plus, RBC 5, and he was culture negative. Now, what is going wrong? This is second UTI, but culture negative. We again stabilized this child. His fever responded to the paracetamol only. And then, is there anything unusual? Is there anything we missed in this child? So here, first time we had got protein 3 plus. So we said, let's look at a urine protein loss. And to our surprise, urine albumin creatinine ratio was 52. Mind you, anything more than 2 is a nephrotic range. This is 52. But here, no edema at all. 5 months baby has no edema and his urine albumin creatinine is 52. His serum albumin was first time documented 1.2 grams. So this was congenital nephrotic syndrome presented without edema. I'm sure all of you attending the meeting, this was first case in my life where I saw a nephrotic without edema. But when I checked the literature, 10% of congenital nephrotics can come without edema. And sir is witnessing, sir, last time we had a nephrotic coming with ascites as a presentation in the Sion clinic. We could never imagine that ascites will come as a first frontline presentation as so common diseases, uncommon presentation of a common disease first. So this was congenital nephrotic edema syndrome. And then through that, through kidneys, he was losing large molecular weight protein. And in this kind of cases, you lose all binding proteins. That's how because of low albumin, his calcium was low because calcium, total calcium was low and ionic calcium was maintained with that magnesium binding protein and magnesium also being lost. And that's what was keeping him low. So this was genetic proven congenital nephrotic syndrome who presented to us as a refractory hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia. This case is going to be reported, a very rare presentation. So again, I wanted to stress and point prejudice. Now, could we have thought one interesting thing which we missed in this child? If you see the first urine report, see this urine report. First cells, sure, he had 1 plus protein. Can you take this as significant? Yes, because he was at low specific gravity. So this was a dilute urine. In a dilute urine, this 1 plus, in a normal urine is usually 2 or 3 plus. He was acidic pH. Acidic pH decreases urine albumin. So had it been a normal pH 6.57, this would have been 3 plus. So other things were not taken into consideration while interpreting this 1 plus, and that's how we missed this case. So that's the importance and beauty of going through the details of these cases. So moral of this case, prejudiced mind, low calcium, low magnesium can miss subtle clues to bigger picture. Urine albumin bond. Second, urine look at pH, specific gravity in the relevant case. Uncommon presentation of common diseases present more often than common presentation of uncommon diseases. So this was a nephrotic without edema. Don't miss out on this. This was a common case. Another Abdullah, 2 months, came with cough since 15 days, 15 severe since 7 days, dyspnea since 2 days, apparently all right for 1 month. History of SIV, died, previous one again diagnosed as SCID at 4 months of age, and 3rd degree consanguinity. How the lab helps you. Now this is a respiratory infection. He was admitted, he was desaturated, he required to be, perhaps he was intubated. His X-ray was hyperinflated bilateral air pneumogram pattern. His counts were bacterial. This was his electrolytes, all on slightly lower side. Calcium was normal, and this was his ABG. Those who are related to ABG, you can see this is metabolic alkalosis. His bicarbs are up and his pH is up. This is metabolic alkalosis. In a respiratory pathology, hyperinflated lung, suggestive of airway obstruction, if you get a metabolic alkalosis on the background of hypochloremia, it is cystic fibrosis unless proved otherwise. A point-blank diagnosis where the primary investigation will help you in diagnosing. So this was confirmed to be a cystic fibrosis, delta 508 positive mutation from Hinduja, and then it was confirmed. So one single investigation can really take you on the right track if you are vigilant enough to note those changes. Another case, 10. Now sometimes the investigation can mislead you also. And this was a very good example of that. This is a 10-year-old child who was brought with abdominal pain for preceding almost 1.5 days, abdominal distension for 1 day, vomiting 2 times, once was bilious. He took treatment from local pediatrician at 12 hours of symptoms. There was no relief. He took again at 24 hours when he was shocking. So sent to surgeon for acute abdomen. He had severe abdominal pain and distension. The surgeon did a sonography, and that was suggestive of pancreatitis as reported. He did amylase lipase 3000, 5000, and this baby was from Mahad, so was referred to us for the further management as acute pancreatitis. On examination, he was alert but hypotensive, abdominal distension, tense abdomen. He was pale. We gave a bolus, fast 2 times, blood culture was sent, and we started him on meropenem. He was sent for a CT abdomen. CT suggested mild pancreatitis. His counts were stress counts, platelets were down. OTPT was not bad. We did the amylase lipase, which was 340, 524. So initial 5000, 3000 has come down to this, whether this is complete absence of enzyme because of total destruction of pancreas. LFT, KFT was otherwise all right. This was his X-ray suggestive of few fluid levels, air fluid levels. This child reached us at 8 p.m. By 12 p.m. 12 night, we had a CT, and he was shocky. By 3:30, he developed refractory shock. We reviewed the case. Abdominal pain was never significant. He had bilious vomiting, X-ray abdomen, multiple air fluid levels, and with ground glass opacity. CT, mild pancreatitis with paralytic ileus, amylase borderline. So are we missing something? Such a severe fluid presentation with CT mild pancreatitis, amylase lipase almost normal. So are we having something else in the mind? So present protocol for acute pancreatitis, don't explore, manage conservatively. Chances of failure are much high if you explore. But here, since he was refractory, we summoned our surgeon, requested him to explore. What happened? Explored after stabilization, hemodynamics, and of course, counseling with a high risk. Venous gangrene of small intestine from DJ to IC junction. Whole small intestine was gangrenous. A band of ligament trees, hemorrhagic fluid in the peritoneum. He was closed for relook after 48 hours, but after 48 hours, whole gangrene bowel had to be resected, and he was an ultra short bowel and cannot survive without a bowel transplant. Later on, the pathology was confirmed. He was referred to Jupiter, wherein they did the pathology, confirmed to be a COVID-19 thrombus in the superior mesenteric artery. So this is the first reported case perhaps in the world of a small bowel gangrene due to COVID-19. Now this is the one which was initially mislabeled, misdiagnosed as pancreatitis due to amylase lipase. And this child later on went on to receive the first small bowel transplant of our country, perhaps in pediatrics. Moral of the story: don't be prejudiced with the reports. Reports can be false positive, false negative, correlate clinically. Amylase lipase can increase due to pancreatitis, can be because of intestinal, and this is my third case of a bowel gangrene giving rise to lipase amylase high. I've seen 800, 1000, 1200. Be careful unless you have a correlating clear-cut history of pancreatitis. And if you see the diagnostic point, it's abdominal pain with the lipase amylase more so, and imaging which should be strong suspect or correlating all together is pancreatitis. So here there were missing flaws. So pancreatitis, intestinal pathologies, gangrene, peritonitis, and occasionally renal pathology. Also you may see lipase amylase high. So correlate the clinical severity with labs and imaging report. This is very important. You get some lab report abnormal, which may be borderline, with a florid clinical symptom. This is not correlating. Sometimes I get a child with a tachypnea distress labeled as a pneumonia and X-ray showing some streaky shadow somewhere. So I ask my resident, can you explain and correlate that X-ray with this clinical child? The correlation is not there. Look for some other cause for that tachypnea distress, and the X-ray related pneumonia is not the cause. And many times you pick up some acidosis or something. Now, coming to imaging, it's not so easy unless you put some extra effort. You sometimes get fooled with those images. This is an interesting case. It's a 2-year-old boy with recurrent respiratory tract infection, 4 admissions in last 18 months. So first admission at 6 months of age. History of Cox contact in the neighborhood where the child used to go regularly. Gastric aspirate showed gene expert and weak positive. Pediatrician referred for bronchoscopic bowel because he was on AKT for 2 months and no clinical response. He wanted to confirm it doubly sure. Examination is malnourished, 7.8 kg, and chronically malnourished. His length is also less. He's a bit tachypnic but reasonably comfortable. And he's clinically had decreased air on left side, and you can see the X-ray. Collapse consolidation of the left side, the right lung being reasonably, perhaps it's a compensatory hyperemphysema. And this was a CT which is almost confirming the X-ray picture. Now, we had a suspect for bowel, but as a history, he had disease starting at 6 months, admitted 3 to 4 times, in between never all right, and then still received AKT only for 2 months, still surviving. Unusual. Disease starting, Cox going on for 1.5 years without any progression and not even killing the child or making him sick. So we were suspecting since he started in first year whether we are dealing with something abnormal. And yes, it turned out to be a H-type TO fistula. Did we have any clue on the X-ray itself? And this is where I told you Dr. Hiren Panwala in one of the CNEs, he diagnosed this, saying that look at the X-ray. You have grossly dilated stomach shadow and you have a esophagus which is carrying gas here. We don't get normally esophagus seen on the chest X-ray. If you see such a dilated esophagus, there is gas getting into esophagus, gas getting into stomach. So this has to be a connection from the esophagus to a gas cavity, that is area. That's how we suspected this could be TO fistula. That's the beauty of radiology if you really put some efforts. So that's what Hiren had diagnosed and given a clue. I won't say diagnosed, but he suspected it. That's the beauty of this. So that's the importance of clinical radiologists, clinical pathologists, clinical microbiologists like Camilla and those giants. So that's the importance. You have to be putting some time in learning this technique. They are not as simple. Another, look at the hidden clues, clinical lab. This 13 months old boy, second of the non-consanguineous couple, fever since 2 months. He had previous, and with mild cough, he had previous 2 episodes of hilarity as 2 and 6 months. On examination, he was severely malnourished, pale, lower consolidation, right upper lobe was there. He was treated as AKT since he was 2 months and days. But then look at the X-ray and the CT done in this child. X-ray, he had breaking up lesion, right upper lobe consolidation and nothing. But a CT I did, and I could see bilateral lower lobe bronchiectasis. Now, this child has a generalized lung disease, which is not a feature of Cox at this age. Bronchiectasis means the disease must be going for a few months, maybe 6 months more. And the history is only of 2 months. So he had something pre-existing. So pre-existing disease in a child going on for 6 months or maybe 1 year with previous 2 episodes. So this is beyond Cox. This is not Cox at all. That's what our impression. We did. He's severely anemic. He was stabilized. We did a bronchoscopy. Gene expert was negative and galactomannan was positive. It was aspergillosis. Then we did his immunodeficiency workup, turned out to be a congenital neutropenia. That's the importance of radiology. Interpret that, correlated clinically. Though the history is of 2 months, you have a disease in the X-ray suggests you have more than 6 months also. So then you have to look for something beyond the routine, beyond the Cox. So this was a bronchiectasis secondary to chronic infection due to congenital neutropenia, which is a rare condition. Few advances in the investigation. We need to understand the limitations of those advances. So this 1-year-old brought with massive melena one day, mild PR bleeding for last 4 days, no trauma, fever, diarrhea, no history of bleeding tendons in the past, no other significant history. He came with severe pallor, hemoglobin was just 4. We just stabilized with transfusion. And we first differential was Meckel's diverticulum. Painless, bleeding, sudden bleeding, massive bleeding, anemia, nothing else. So Meckel's diverticulum. This was in a lockdown period, very difficult to get Meckel's scan. And then we got it done from Justlow, which showed negative, no gastric mucosa seen in the intestine. So Meckel's scan was negative. So what is the differential diagnosis? We are worried whether we are dealing with some hemangioma or something, which is very difficult. Then on a very high index of suspicion, we still went with the exploratory laparotomy. And then it turned out to be a gangrenous Meckel's diverticulum. We need to understand the limitation. Meckel's scan is a gold standard, but 10% may not show the Meckel's scan positivity even after the Meckel's scan. So there is a false negativity of 10% in the gold standard. So take home, know your gold standard tests well, advantages as well as limitations to be done, because that's the best test available today. That also can fail. And then sometimes again, a clinical index of suspicion is so important. We cannot do a capsule endoscopy in this child. So sometimes you may have to go on a clinical index of suspicion. This was laparoscopically performed and the child is doing perfectly okay. It was a gangrenous Meckel's. We need to understand the limitation of this gold standard investigations. We need to understand the changing patterns of the disease. There are certain diseases, as I said, we are seeing totally new in the present area. What are they? The 5 months old, breathless since 3 days, referred by primary pediatrician, low fever for 5 days ago, mild cough, uneventful neonatal and early life injury, well-grown child. This was tachycardic, he came in cardiac failure simply with a hypotensive cardiac failure and cardiogenic shock. His liver was 4 centimeter tachycardic, BP was low, saturation was normal at this point of time. And this was X-ray, a globular heart, myocarditis suspect. X-ray was that, stress counts, ECG strain pattern, pro-BNP was 2000, clearly high. What next? We did his calcium, which was low, magnesium was low, PTH was appropriate, and very low vitamin D. Now, these are new things which we must know. This is not actually new, but this has come in last decade. That's what I said. These are the diseases which never thought in our undergraduate and postgraduate days. This has come up in the last decade. I'm sure many of you must be thinking. In the olden day, we used to think of myocarditis. Somebody might have thought, cardiologist might have given you Hull-Kappa as a diagnosis. But this is an entity which is now getting more and more established. We stabilized this child with diuretics and ventilation initially, needed almost 10 days of ventilation. The calcium recovered in 1 week, but myocardial dysfunction took almost 6 months to become normal. And this was vitamin D deficiency cardiomyopathy. This is labeled as vitamin D deficiency cardiomyopathy. This is not hypocalcemic cardiomyopathy. Even if the calcium recovers, the heart doesn't become normal. It takes almost 6 months to become normal. And this is becoming more and more common. In olden days, same diseases would have been labeled like this and being treated partially. But yes, vitamin D, whether it is bubble or what, we are getting more and more convinced that yes, does it come from? When I left my postgraduate 1990, till first 15 years, we are never using vitamin D so often. But today's protocol for every newborn, for first 1 year, we have to give vitamin, irrespective of preterm, postterm, whatever. 1 year vitamin D, which we never gave in first 20 years of my practice. So were they dying so much in the past? I really don't know. But yes, today is a protocol because it's proven by evidence that vitamin D is so essential. Get used to typicals and atypicals. 18 months girl brought with chief complaints of fever for 3 days, remittent, decreased activity interfebrile, vomiting so 1 day, non-bilions, right hemifocal seizure on day 3. a typical history of some meningoencephalitis of of a 1.5-year-old, fever for 3 days, looks very likely bacterial, could be viral, whatever, but hemifocal seizure, that's a slight striking. So on an infective inflammatory background, hemifocal seizure. He came in compensated shock, gallop rhythm. So he had a cardiocirculatory failure as well. He was drowsy. No other local, at that time, I could not get any focal deficit. He was stabilized with fluids and inotropes. And these were his primary investigations. On the count, there was thrombocytopenia. The CSF was done, which was 640 cells, neutrophilic, sugar slightly low, proteins were high, and rest of the things were normal. So, looking again like a pyogenic meningitis. History was slightly odd. We had hemifocal seizure, whether there was any localization already setting up. He was put on vancomycin at that point of time. Repeat episodes continued, seizures continued for next 3 to 4 days. MRI suggested diffusion restriction, left frontal cortex, so focal lesion was there. Encephalopathy on EEG. He was required intubation, mechanical ventilation for frequent seizures and shock. Antiepileptics were stepped up. CSF repeated after 4 days, showed slight improvement, but clinical seizures and the severity continued, fever continued. CBC was looking stress counts, ESR, CRP was high. And then we did a 2D echo for his cardiac status, which was showing pericardial effusion. So are we getting some new clue? Child became conscious, child's other activity improved. So we extubated this child. And then we could get a look at his whole face and then certain things. So by this time, what we had, persistent fever for a week, persistent seizures with diffusion restriction on MRI, CSF leukocytosis, high inflammatory markers, pericardial effusion. Now, if I give you this picture in isolation or in a group, what is it? It's some inflammatory marker, and this was a atypical Kawasaki, which came as a cerebral vasculitis. And then once we could remove the strips, the ventilator, although he was covered with everything on the intensive care, we could not see the eyes properly because they were strapped. And once you opened it, we could see the conjunctival congestion, we could see the mucositis, and then we could see later on send the edema. And this was a atypical Kawasaki, came as a cerebral vasculitis. So we need to understand, he received IVIG following that and recovered quickly. So we need to understand the typical and atypical Kawasaki, the complete and incomplete Kawasaki. We need to understand this because it is going to stay here. It's going to be here, I'm sure, till the end of our practice. Those who are in 30s and 40s, you need to understand, we need to know everything of Kawasaki because it's really showing different pieces. Now, COVID add on to that, perhaps we'll have to be master at it. When you don't get expected response, what do you think? So unusual purgation, non-responder. This is Nidhi, 10 months, brought with cough since 3 days, cough, cold, and then change in voice and dyspnea since 1 day. And she had a hoarse voice with stridor. So typical croup. She came like a typical croup. Typical thing. And he should respond to a shot of steroid, maybe adrenaline nebulization. But she won't do that for next 2 days, 3 days. What do you do next? Obviously, one has to find out what is there. So obviously, it's upper airway. So we did a scope in this child. And what is it? Look carefully. I did the scope in this child. You are seeing, this is the epiglottis, and below that is the glottis. You'll see the next brain. Yes, there is something in the foreign body. Can you see that? There is a foreign body, which was a piece of a furniture piece. And then you get back to the history and father reveals, yes, there is a furniture work going on at house. And this is something. And then we removed that foreign body just at our click. We don't have to call the surgeon. We did it under ketamine with a forceps. It's a foreign body. So what is the take home? If stridor does not subside in 2 days of treatment in group, other pathologies, we need to do a scope in this. And so every stridor, I won't do it. But in 48 hours, you don't get a response. Yes, think of something else. So take home, know the disease normal course. Every disease has its normal onset, duration, progress. If it extends or there is a diversion from routine, think of a complication, think of an unusual host who is not behaving properly, or you have to change the diagnosis, look for other rate and investigate further. You cannot afford to miss this. There are certain conditions in India you can't afford to miss. This is an interesting one, a slightly longer one. 3 months, 7 days old baby, non-consanguineous, brought with fever off and on for 3 weeks and cough for 3 weeks. I'm sure it must have clicked you what you are dealing with. 3 months fever, 3 months cough in this country are in TCP COX. All right, before this illness, uneventful birth history, referred from pediatrics unit for progressive respiratory distress and hypoxia. So he deteriorated. He was admitted twice in those 3 weeks course, progressed, so was sent to us. His weight gain was quite good. Development was good. He's one of the twins, the other one being absolutely normal, no family contact history, mother healthy. He was tachypneic saturation 84%, hemodynamically stable, and he had clinically right upper lobe pneumonia. Liver was just 1 centimeter. And note the counts, the middle two. This is what was initially strong bacterial counts, platelets high, one which at our pace still bacterial, platelets high, inflammatory markers very strong. And this was the X-ray serially done in 3 weeks. Progressively increasing pneumonia with breaking up lesions clearly, right? So looks like a strong bacteria. So which bacteria is that which is progressing with a breaking up lesion? The referring person had done a CT thorax also, and this reported thorax person said there is a right bronchus obstruction. So was referred to us. We are wondering whether we are dealing with any obstructive congenital pathology or something else. There are the right upper lobe bronchus obstruction was referred to us. Now what next? This is a child, 3 weeks history, progressively deteriorating, X-ray showing breaking up lesion, counts are strongly bacterial, inflammatory markers are high. Which bacteria is that? With these reports, he was sent for a scopy to us. And what we got in the scopy? So this is, I have taken directly into the trachea. This is the left main bronchus. And I will come to the carina and note the carina. I will coming back now. And note the carina in this child. See the carina. Can you note it? The left bronchus, the right bronchus. This is the right bronchus, this is the left bronchus. Right bronchus is showing some indentation on the wall. Right bronchus is showing some indentation and narrowing at the aperture. And at few frames, you could see the glistening material, which is granulation material, probably. And then the child started bleeding torrentially. So we had to get our scope back, and then we put it again and we collected a ball in this child. And that is what was processed, and ball turned out to be gene expert positive. So this was endobronchial tuberculosis in a 3-month-old baby. We are conventionally taught the Holgren's calendar of tuberculosis, which shows meningitis will come after so time, primary complex will come at this time, cox will come after 10 years, bone cox will come after 4 years, but the calendar perhaps is changing. We are seeing TB meningitis at 1, I've seen at 1.5 months. I've seen endobronchial tuberculosis coming at 2 months. I've seen biliary right at the birth. So those kind of things has to be kept in mind. Practicing in India, TB has no bars in this country, age, sex, rural, urban, rich, poor, you may see anywhere. Thus in subacute onset, prolonged disease, first differential diagnosis, TB unless put otherwise. Always attempt definitive diagnosis, avoid empirical treatment. A consultant in India must know everything of TB. You must know the latest diagnostic modalities. Gene expert has become a gold standard now. MGIT culture always to be done, even if it is rifampicin sensitive, because you may get INH resistant at times, which can become resistant over the time to hold drugs. Line probe assay for genotypic resistance is a very another interesting thing. Sometimes phenotypic resistance also holds, which is more close to the reality. And then some new kid in the things of pyrosequencing is a new armamentarium for quick MDR diagnosis. This is what has started, wherein done only for CSF TB, where you get the second line and third line genetic resistance within 8 hours of sampling. That's something very, very phenomenal. You can't wait for 2 weeks and 3 weeks for a TBM to progress with the gene. So this is available within 8 hours, pyrosequencing, and this is a new entry to the armamentarium TB. Know the advances. We must know what is happening in the field of pediatrics in advance, and we must get interested in that as well. Brahmi was a 4-month-old female child delivered yield bulk W 700 grams. For 72 days, she was in Dubai in an ICU and came back to India for a vacation. She was born, she was discharged at 1.6 kg. She came back to India for a vacation for 4 months, and here she developed with a viral respiratory infection, which progressed to ARDS and pulmonary hypertension. She came to us, she was on ventilator, required all kind of advanced ventilation, high frequency nitric oxide, antibiotics, and then we could extubate after 7 days. We could discharge her after 14 days. So she was one of the really challenges. We could see a big mob, South Indian family, very religious, and then fortunately we could get her off. After discharge, 1 week later, she came with progressively increasing respiratory distress again. And this time it was Strider. What was it? Whether it was, we gave as a group, we started treating dexamethasone, adrenaline, progressive deterioration, again becoming hypoxic. And then now it was really challenging to convince the relative that I want to do scopy, I want to do this, that. Finance was not at all limitation. She was an air hostess in the Emirates. Father was a businessman. So finance was not an issue, but they were still continuing with a small pace like Panvel and very religious because first time we had done a good job. So they allowed us. We did a scopy considering it's considering it's a Strider, and what we got. So look at this scope. Look at this. This is glottis, and there is a good, nice subglottic membrane with a small pinhole. This is the one where I could not negotiate my scope, which is 3.5 also. So we had to take a small ET tube here and 3 number ET tube. We opened it up. Then we put 3.5 number ET tube. And now with a newer technique, we have to lubricate the ET tube with a steroid ointment, which works like a local steroid application to this whatever membrane. And we ruptured the membrane through that and left the tube inside for 48 hours. And then gradually removed, and the child was absolutely all right. Now we need to understand these availabilities of these advances, the scopies, the various advanced investigations, MRIs, the intervention, so many things people are doing. And in fact, the vascular interventions are so much happening in this country. So medical advances are very rapid. If you want to stay longer, no option but to upgrade ICU, ventilation, bedside USG, scopy, take up something. Take one specialty at least along with generalists to keep your interest in the practice. Else it may become boring exercise over the years. Practicing for 34, 40 years is really a boring job unless you keep on upgrading yourself. So I think you have to do something different than what you have been doing all the times. Every year you should take up some new technique, some new challenge that will keep you interested. Otherwise, it's very difficult to keep up in the practice. That's how people divert into finances, into meditation and this. But I don't know. I believe that I can only survive with my medicine and my practice. So to keep it myself, I have been upgrading myself all along. That's a secret of whatever I could get it. I have another maybe 2 or 3 cases to say. So this is another interesting preterm 1 kg 29 weaker. Ensure the surfactant was given and kept on CPAP. PDA was seen on the day 16 of life, so was kept on paracetamol. Day 20, he developed the features of necrotizing enterocolitis, distended abdomen, platelet going down, hyponatremia. He was kept in NBM, and now we wanted to take a central line, which was put through the cephalous vein. So we put it, and TPN was started. 4 days later, respiratory distress with a feeble pulse, muffled heart sounds. So something was happening. Evaluating the shock, we gave a small bolus, it did not work. We started inotropes, not working. So bedside echo was done, and this was an X-ray prior showing cardiomegaly. So the echo was done, and what does it show? So massive pericardial effusion in the 1 kg baby. This is the 1 kg baby mind. Massive pericardial effusion was there. What to do with this? Olden days, it was a big challenge. First, these babies used to die without diagnosis as a sepsis, refractory shock. But now with the modalities available, we can do a lot. So once we diagnosed, we tapped, and you can see it's a milky white fluid. It's a milky white fluid. It could be pus, it could be anything. But what was it in the child? This child, we tapped. So after tap, child quickly stabilized hemodynamically. Shock was revived, and that pus, that fluid which we collected was actually a lipid emulsion which was put into the TPN. Now the cephalous line had gone and abated the entry of right atrium, and that's one of the known side effects, though not very common. Post CVC cardiac tamponade is well documented entity. Incidence is 1.7% with a very high mortality rate, 81%, simply because they are detected late. In the olden days, that was so. Today, we have got bedside echo. We are doing every now and then. Believe me, in the ICU, we use echo more than stethoscope today. It's absolutely essential part of the ICU. One cannot run an ICU without a bedside echo. It's for a functional echo, it's for the fast, it's for the skull sonos, it's for the neonatal skull, and even a vascular. So many things you can do. And I'm sure it's going to replace most of your modalities. So this child had that line abetting and perforating the heart into the pericardial fluid. So we pulled out a line and the child settled down, and this child was successfully discharged after 2 weeks. Now I'm coming to important, probably the last important case. That's a challenge to sum up your history, clinical examination, and the investigation. How? So it's a Sherlock Holmes story. Obviously, it has to be slightly longer. And this was 4.5-year-old boy, 3rd-degree consanguinity with birth weight of 2.8 kg. He complained of anasarca for last 15 days, deranged development, chronic skin disorder since early infancy, irritability since last few months. So he came to us at 4.5 months. He was from Nagpur, taking treatment all along at Nagpur for so many. And lockdown period, they came here and they came first time with this kind of a complaint. Anasarca, deranged development. He had a chronic skin development disorder since 3 months of age. Interesting developmental story. Gross motor, standing started at 2 years, walking at 2.5 years, walked for next 1 year, and then stopped walking since last 1 year. Now he can only sit. Moves hands voluntarily but not moving legs and cannot stand. His fine motors, feeds himself properly. Now he can hold the pen, scribble, draw few figures. Reasonably okay for the age. Speech and cognition was reasonably good. So predominantly gross motor being delayed, fine motor slightly delayed, cognition within normal limit, I would say. Though speech was slightly late in starting. His skin rash was labeled outside as psoriasis and being treated with steroids off and on for first 2 years of life. But when he came to us, I showed it to Dr. Deepak Parekh and he said it's a severe atopic dermatitis. So I had more faith in my pediatric dermatitis than anything else. He had severe nutritional deficit on the history. Diet was deficient and proteins, calories both were deficient. On examination, vitals were stable at that point, but weight was 12 kg at 4.5 years with anasarca. Height was 93 centimeters. So it was severe chronic malnutrition. Generalized anasarca, atopic dermatitis rash. This was his rash after his recurrent chronic, applications. And you can see the rickets. So rickets in a malnourished child is usually secondary that we have been taught. This was edema he had come with and few skin changes, a mixture of his nutritional status, could be kwashiorkor, could be whatever it is, and edema. Definitely not looking like a nephrotic. And this was child was irritable. You can see the sparse hair and rest of the features. So child very irritable, painful movements of the limbs, hairs are sparse, golden black color, easily pluckable. Widening of wrist, costochondral prominences noted. CNS, higher function normal, cranial was normal, generalized hypotonia, upper limb power 5, lower limb power 3, reflexes slightly brisk, upper limbs normal, planters were down. So are we really dealing with a neurological disorder? We have doubts, but yes, lower limbs were definitely having lower power. Abdominal, no organomegaly, no fluid, respiratory CNS, serious normal. So now so far, he was growth retarded, stunted and wasted, multiple vitamin deficiency. We had seen vitamin D, definitely we had seen the skin changes. Anasarca without other systemic signs of probably protein deficiency, skin changes of atopic dermatitis, recent regression of motor milestones, whether it was painful, whether it is pseudoparesis. So whether it is neurological or non-neurological. We did the investigations, counts, we didn't find anything except eosinophilia, which could be because of atopic dermatitis. ESR slightly high. Liver function was bang normal except proteins very low, 4.3, of which albumin was just 1.6, fitting with our analogy of kwashiorkor. Calcium was very low, 4.1. Alkaline phosphate was low, was high and phosphates were low. So hypocalcemia, hypoalbuminemia. Vitamin D was less than 8 nanograms, severe deficiency, PTA which was appropriate. Stools were not showing fat globules. This was the X-ray we did for the limbs because we found it is pseudopalsy, a classical case of scurvy on the X-ray. So now we have vitamin D deficiency, vitamin C deficiency, protein deficiency, atopic dermatitis, and severely chronically stunted and wasted child. So what we have? Eczema since 3 months age, severe rickets, scurvy, pseudoparalysis due to scurvy, hypoproteinemia, severe PEM, stunting and wasting, kwashiorkor. So multi-nutrient malabsorption can be malabsorption with a chronic. So it's a chronic prolonged malabsorption. That's what I could fit in. Now, is it chronic malabsorption? We did a TTG IGF for celiac, which was negative. Now, where do we stand? So we stabilize the child with vitamin D, vitamin C, increased calorie, protein, and then there was a rapid clinical improvement. Child lost edema completely next 10 days. Weight loss was 10.4 kg. Dermatological lesions subsided. Irritability decreased, and child started walking within 2 weeks. Last 1 year, 1.5 years, child had not stood. He started walking in 15 days. The parents were thinking he's a miracle, and we thought it's a miracle. And then obviously next question asked, साहब ये बढ़ेगा कभी? अभी वो बोलो, अभी बहुत नाटा दिखता है, इसका क्या करेंगे? This was his picture post recovery. So what was the cause? So we thought it's correlating the two. We thought what is that? So we summoned Vibhor Borkar and he did the scopy, lower GI and upper GI. And we did the biopsy from the scopy. It was eosinophilic enteritis leading to malabsorption. So atopic dermatitis as a corollary to that, allergic enteropathy giving rise to malabsorption. Child is on steroid followed by cyclosporin. He is recovering extremely well. And here is a walking, running child who never did it for last 4 years. And that's a miracle of your clinical examination, interpretation, and correlating with the latest technology. That's the beauty. So take home one patient, one disease, try to bring under one umbrella pathology. Last case, but probably the most important lesson I learned of my life. This is neonate, day 1, referred for suspected tracheoesophageal fistula, almost 25 years of life. Certain incidences make your life stunningly different. And this is one of them, which I will carry till the end of my life. I put the stiff rubber catheter. I could not negotiate. It was bloody secretion aspirated from the proximal end because the previous pediatrician also had tried that. So I thought it could be just a trauma there. I referred it to the senior pediatric surgeon in Mumbai. His resident, this was in the evening hours. So obviously senior resident, he saw the child, he confirmed that the tube could not be negotiated. So he said, fine, it's fistula, and X-ray was taken at that point of time. He said, it's fine. So this was the X-ray we could see. The tube was not going beyond T4. So this was confirmed. Now, his resident confirmed the finding and posted for surgery next morning. So next morning, sir went for the surgery. Anesthesia was given. He opened the thorax, and to his surprise, he noticed the normal esophagus with just a small perforation. The esophagus was patent, and there was a small perforation. This was esophageal spasm while negotiating the catheter at the primary pediatrician level, which relieved after anesthesia. Now, issue is not over here. Issue is something which is absolutely memorable. This man was #1 pediatric surgeon probably of the country. He was teacher to almost every pediatric surgeon in this country. 3 days later, he met me in an MBCon meet. He called me. He personally came to me and said, I'm sorry for the mishap. This great man was Dr. Subhash Dalal, sir. That was the beauty. I mean, these are the people, these are the teachers we have, sir. Dr. Ambedkar, sir, Dr. Subhash Dalal, sir. They taught us making mistake is a step in learning. Accepting mistake is the first step to progressing, and not repeating the mistake is a sign of mastery. Such were the teacher we had. Such were the teacher who made us what we are today. And such were the teacher we are really kind of, I can't, I have no words to express. Whatever I have today, I owe it to my teacher, Dr. Ambedkar sir. And of course, so I didn't have much time to interact with this great person, but whenever I had, I used to be getting a kind of अंगावर काटा येतात असं म्हणत. ही माणसं एवढी मोठी आहेत, इतकी मोठी आहेत की I can just, even if I achieve 5% of that, I will feel my light is made. So it's a never ending story, friends. Learning continues till end of life. My journey continues, and now new challenges are going to come with MIC, COVID, and everything. And that's all. Thank you very much for
हाँ,
the patient here.
सब खराब कर रहे हो यार.
Mahesh, Doctor,
Yeah.
Dr. Can you give some your at least valuable suggestion and some?
I will stop sharing before that.
Yeah.
I think all that I can say is I have learned so much. Okay. And I think it's so interesting that all such cases that Mahesh talked about and we have seen over years, every time we are wiser at the end of the story. And unfortunately, again, when similar thing comes after a year or two, we seem to be forgetting what we had to remember. I'm sure you allow me for such lapse of memory, but I sometimes shudder that same thing, similar thing seen after a year or two, I go through the same mistake again and again. And I think that's the beauty of continuing to learn. What Mahesh showed today is, for example, simple thing, every time an undergraduate, postgraduate is told to ask about urine, and what are we looking at? We are usually looking at oliguria, but we almost forget polyuria. And in an infant, polyuria is impossible even to pick up. I think what a simple statement. He showed another case. I always have been telling my students that whatever happens suddenly is mechanical or neurogenic or immunological or metabolic, whatever. Poison is one such thing. And Mahesh showed that something happened suddenly was due to poison. I think if we look at the origin, duration, progress, it was an excellent thing. Lastly, what Mahesh said, he is happy if he is 5% of all his teachers. Mahesh, I can tell you, I am also not 5% of what you are. Okay, forget the percentage, forget the percentage. See, the point is, I know that last 20 or 30 years, I have been learning most from my so-called students who have now become great teachers even to me. And I value that so much. And I really mean it. I think my postgraduate teaching has taught me more than my teaching students. And one thing that has done very well for me, and I hope also for my colleagues, is we have 6 to 8 teachers teaching at the same time. And each one is good at something but bad at some other thing. Each one learns, and imagine students learn from multiple teachers. I always thought that when I went to the library, I found the textbook from 2, 3 different authors. But I knew which chapter was best described by one book, but not so much by another book. I think that's the beauty of learning, and I'm so happy that Mahesh has been a part of our team, has contributed so much, and willingly. I must say that my colleagues have not bothered about their practice on one evening of the week. They have sacrificed their income every Thursday, and I know Mahesh does not practice on Thursday at all. Right from morning, taking round at Wadia in PICU, teaching them, afternoon, studying in the library at Wadia, and joining us on Thursday evening at science, going home back at 11 o'clock at night. I think this is a passion that makes the teacher so valuable. I am so happy to have attended today, Mahesh. I must
Thank you,
say
sir.
that I enjoyed every
Thank
case
you.
that you presented, and it was a learning point for all of us. Thank you very much, Naresh, who sent me a message that I must also attend. And I thought it was my privilege and honor to attend such a wonderful session. 2 hours nearly went through so well. I'm sure Mahesh could have gone on talking and you could have gone on listening. I'm not sure how much I will retain within the next few hours, but I will try to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sir, it was your great humbleness to say that, in fact, you are everything for us. I can still vouch and say, like Mahesh said, that whatever we are today is only sir because of sir teaching, is that have a systemic history, systemic examination, and follow-up, and you can diagnose so many diseases. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It was Mahesh. It was like a panorama of pediatrics in last 1.5 hours. It was so mesmerizing, and especially the presence of Sir and his talk at the end was really a highlight of everything. Mahesh, we are always thankful to you for all the presentation and the amount of work you put in every case, and the amount you present the case with everything knowing about the case. Remarkable. We are all thankful to you.
we ask Pawan to just give a vote of thanks. Pawan. Pawan, you are there? Okay. I think Pawan is not there. So, Mahesh, it was really great, and we are very thankful to you. And it was a real wonderful, sir. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very
made
much.
our day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mahesh. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much
Thank
for inviting.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.